James Wilson had everything: a billion-dollar empire, a life of luxury, and absolute control over his destiny. Or so he thought. As he leaned back on the deck of his private yacht, sipping his whiskey and watching the sun set over the Philippine waters, he had no idea that his entire world was about to shift. Then she appeared. A young woman, her expression unreadable, her presence unexpected. She walked straight toward him, her eyes locked onto his with quiet determination. "James," she said, her voice steady. "We need to talk." He arched an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Do we know each other?" A pause. Then, 3 words that sent a chill down his spine. "I'm pregnant." "It's yours." And just like that, the life he had built so carefully was about to change forever. The sun cast a golden glow over the calm waters as James Wilson leaned back in his reclining chair on the deck of his private yacht. The ocean stretched endlessly around him, the rhythmic sound of the waves blending with the occasional cry of seagulls overhead. A gentle breeze rustled his neatly pressed linen shirt, and he took a slow sip of his whiskey, savoring the warmth of the liquid as it burned slightly down his throat. This was the kind of life he had worked so hard to build, one of absolute luxury, peace, and control. James had spent the last decade turning Wilson Tech into one of the most dominant tech firms in the industry. His days were usually filled with back-to-back meetings, negotiations, and high-stakes decisions, but this trip to the Philippines was meant to be different. He had told himself he would disconnect, let go of work for a while, and simply enjoy the serenity of being far away from the pressures of corporate life. The yacht, a masterpiece of modern engineering, was anchored a few miles off the coast, giving him the privacy he so rarely experienced. His crew moved quietly in the background, ensuring everything ran smoothly. The chef had prepared an exquisite meal earlier, and now, with the last rays of sunlight dipping below the horizon, James was content to simply exist in the moment. Then he noticed her. A woman had stepped onto the deck, her movements hesitant but deliberate. She was young, likely in her early 20s, with long dark hair that swayed slightly in the evening breeze. She wore a simple but elegant dress, its soft fabric hugging her frame in a way that suggested grace rather than extravagance. Her deep brown eyes held something unreadable, nervousness, perhaps, or determination. James straightened slightly, setting his glass down. He had met plenty of people over the years who sought his attention, but something about the way she carried herself told him this wasn't an ordinary encounter. She approached cautiously, her fingers gripping the strap of the small bag slung over her shoulder. When she stopped just a few feet from him, she inhaled deeply as if gathering her courage. "Mr. Wilson," she said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor beneath it. He tilted his head, observing her more closely. There was something vaguely familiar about her, but he couldn't quite place it. "Yes," he responded, his tone polite but guarded. She swallowed hard, shifting her weight slightly. "My name is Anna," she said, looking directly into his eyes. "We met before." "In Manila." James furrowed his brows slightly, searching his memory. He had been to Manila several times for business and leisure, had attended more than a few exclusive events, but he couldn't recall her. "I'm sorry," he said, shaking his head slightly. "I meet a lot of people. You'll have to remind me." Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag, and for a brief moment, she hesitated. Then she exhaled slowly, as if accepting the inevitable. "I didn't come here for small talk," she said finally. "I came because I needed to tell you something important." There was something in her voice now, an urgency that made James sit up a little straighter. The air between them seemed to shift, the easy comfort of his evening now carrying an undertone of something heavier. She took another step forward, her gaze unwavering. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "And the baby is yours." Silence followed, thick and unrelenting. The sounds of the ocean continued around them, but in that moment, James heard nothing else. For the first time in a long time, he was completely unprepared for what came next. James stared at her, his mind momentarily blank. The words hung in the air between them, carried by the soft ocean breeze, yet they didn't seem real. He was used to surprises in the business world, last-minute contract changes, market shifts, unexpected buyouts, but nothing had ever caught him off guard quite like this. He studied her face carefully, searching for any sign that this was some kind of setup, a misunderstanding, or worse, a lie. But Anna didn't flinch under his gaze. She stood there, steady, composed, but not unaffected. There was tension in her shoulders and uncertainty in her stance, but it was clear she wasn't here for a confrontation. James exhaled slowly and leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees as he tried to regain control of the situation. "I don't know what you expect me to say," he finally admitted, his voice calm but edged with skepticism. Anna's expression didn't change, though he noticed the way she clenched her hands together as if bracing for his reaction. "I don't expect anything," she said. "I just thought you should know." James let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking his head. "That's it? You show up out of nowhere, drop this on me, and walk away?" Anna's lips pressed into a thin line. "I tried to contact you. More than once. But you're not exactly easy to reach." That much was true. James kept a tight circle, his personal information guarded by assistants, security teams, and corporate barriers that made direct access nearly impossible. If she had tried, and she wasn't lying about that, then it meant she had gone through some trouble just to get here. Still, that didn't mean he could accept her claim at face value. "I think you need to understand how this sounds," he said, his tone measured. "A woman I barely remember suddenly finds me on my private yacht and tells me she's pregnant with my child. You can see why I might have doubts." Anna's jaw tightened slightly, but she didn't look surprised. "I expected that," she admitted. "And I don't blame you for being skeptical. But I'm not here for money, James. I have my own life, my own career, and I can take care of this baby with or without you." James wasn't sure what frustrated him more, her confidence in handling this alone or the fact that a small part of him believed her. "You keep saying you don't want anything from me," he said, narrowing his eyes. "So why are you here?" Anna hesitated for the first time, shifting her weight slightly. "Because no child should grow up without knowing who their father is," she said softly. "And because you deserve to know, even if you don't want to be involved." James ran a hand through his hair, trying to process the magnitude of what she was saying. If this was true, if she really was carrying his child, then his entire life had just changed in a way he had never anticipated. He had built his empire on control, on calculated decisions, on knowing every possible outcome before making a move. But this? This was chaos. This was uncertainty. He let out a slow breath, weighing his next words carefully. "I'm not saying I believe you," he said. "But if what you're saying is true, then I need proof." Anna nodded as if she had been expecting that. "I'm willing to do a paternity test as soon as possible," she said. "I have nothing to hide." Her willingness to cooperate made it harder for James to dismiss her outright. He had dealt with enough people trying to take advantage of him to recognize when someone was playing a game. But Anna didn't have the usual desperation, the manipulative charm, or the rehearsed speeches. She was just honest. That made him uneasy. James stood up, rubbing the back of his neck as he paced a few steps along the deck, his mind racing with possibilities. He needed time to think, time to figure out what this meant, but he also knew that delaying the inevitable wouldn't change reality. Finally, he stopped and turned back to her. "All right," he said. "I'll arrange for the test. If it proves that the baby is mine, then we'll have another conversation about what comes next." Anna exhaled as if she had been holding her breath, nodding once. "That's all I ask." James didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked out at the darkening horizon, the waves rolling in a steady, endless rhythm. Just hours ago, his biggest concern had been whether he wanted another drink or if he should take the jet skis out before dinner. Now, everything had changed. And for the first time in years, James Wilson had no idea what his next move should be. James spent the next few hours pacing the deck of his yacht, replaying the conversation over and over in his head. No matter how many times he went through it, nothing changed the fact that Anna had walked into his world and shattered the illusion of control he had worked so hard to maintain. He had built his entire life around precision, around knowing the risks and making calculated decisions, yet here he was, blindsided by something he had never seen coming. The logical part of him wanted to dismiss it, to assume that she was mistaken or lying, that this was just another attempt to attach herself to his wealth and status. But the way she had spoken, the way she had looked him in the eye without hesitation or fear, made it difficult to believe that she had any ulterior motives. He had dealt with enough people trying to manipulate him to recognize the difference. She wasn't here for money, and that unsettled him even more. A knock on the door of his private lounge pulled him from his thoughts. One of his security team members stepped inside, his posture stiff and professional. "Sir, the arrangements have been made. The clinic in Manila is expecting you and Miss Garcia tomorrow morning for the test." James nodded, appreciating the efficiency. "Good. Make sure everything is private. I don't want the press getting wind of this." "Yes, sir." The security officer hesitated for a brief moment before adding, "Would you like us to conduct a background check on her?" James considered it for a second before shaking his head. "No. If she was after something, she wouldn't have come here like this. Let's not make things more complicated than they already are." The officer nodded and left the room, leaving James alone with his thoughts once more. That night, sleep didn't come easily. He lay awake in his suite, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing through all the possible outcomes of what he was about to confirm or deny. He had never thought about fatherhood, had never even entertained the idea that something like this could happen to him. His life was structured, predictable, and carefully managed. A child didn't fit into that equation. But whether he liked it or not, he had to face the possibility that everything was about to change. The next morning, James arrived at the clinic in Manila. He had taken his private jet, ensuring that their visit remained discreet. Anna was already there when he walked in, sitting quietly in the waiting area. She looked up as he approached, her expression unreadable but calm. "Didn't think you'd actually show up," she said, her voice even. James sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Neither did I." The nurse called them in, leading them down a quiet hallway to a private examination room. The doctor greeted them with a professional yet impersonal smile, clearly accustomed to handling cases like this. "We'll collect DNA samples from both of you today," the doctor explained. "The results should be ready within a few days. Do either of you have any questions?" James shook his head, his expression unreadable. Anna simply said, "No." The process was quick. A simple cheek swab, a few signatures, and it was done. James didn't speak much as they left the clinic, but as they stepped outside into the warm Manila air, he finally turned to her. "If this comes back positive," he said carefully, "we need to figure out what happens next." Anna met his gaze, her expression steady. "I know." He studied her for a long moment before nodding. "All right." He turned toward the car waiting for him at the curb, ready to head back to his jet and put this entire situation on hold until the results came in. But before he stepped inside, he glanced back at her one last time. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was standing there, arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the city, lost in her own thoughts. For the first time since she had walked onto his yacht, he wondered what this had been like for her. He had been thinking about what this meant for him. But what had it meant for her? Without another word, he got into the car, the door closing behind him with a quiet finality. Now, all he could do was wait. The days that followed were filled with an unfamiliar kind of tension for James. He had spent his life navigating high-stakes business deals, making decisions that impacted thousands of employees, and maneuvering through corporate politics with ease. But this situation was different. It wasn't about logic, negotiation, or strategy. It was about something deeply personal, something he couldn't control with money or power. He had thrown himself back into work the moment he returned to his office in New York. Meetings, reports, and back-to-back calls filled his schedule, yet none of it could distract him from the thought that lingered at the back of his mind. Every time his phone buzzed, a flicker of anticipation and anxiety ran through him, only to be replaced by frustration when it was just another email or business notification. He wasn't used to waiting. He was used to action, to solving problems as they arose, not sitting back while someone else determined the outcome of his future. 3 days after the test, while reviewing quarterly projections in his private office, his phone finally rang. He didn't recognize the number, but he knew exactly who it was. Without hesitation, he answered. "Mr. Wilson," a professional-sounding woman asked. "This is Dr. Reyes from the Manila Genetics Clinic. I'm calling with your test results." James took a slow breath, gripping the edge of his desk as he leaned forward. "Go ahead." There was a brief pause before she continued. "The results confirm with 99.99% accuracy that you are the biological father of Miss Garcia's child." James closed his eyes for a brief second, letting the words settle. He had considered this outcome, prepared for it even, but hearing it confirmed was something else entirely. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady. "I appreciate the call." As soon as he ended the call, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He stared down at his desk, his mind running through a dozen different thoughts at once. He was going to be a father. There was no question anymore, no room for denial or skepticism. This was real. A knock on his office door interrupted his thoughts, and Rachel, his assistant, stepped in. She took one look at his face and hesitated. "Bad news?" James shook his head, running a hand over his face before straightening in his chair. "No. Just news." She studied him for a moment before nodding. "You have a board meeting in 10 minutes. Should I push it back?" He exhaled, forcing himself to focus. "No. I'll be there." As Rachel left, James sat back in his chair, staring at his reflection in the dark glass of the office window. The city skyline stretched before him, endless and glittering, a testament to everything he had built. His empire had always been his legacy. His company had been the one thing he had poured himself into, believing it was what would define him in the long run. But now, that definition had changed. That night, for the first time in years, he didn't sleep well. His mind refused to shut down, running through every possible scenario. What did this mean for him? For Anna? For the child? He didn't know the first thing about being a father. He had no blueprint, no frame of reference. His own father had been more of a distant figure than a guiding presence, a man who had taught him discipline and work ethic but never warmth or affection. James had never minded before, never felt like he was missing anything. But now, as he faced the reality of having a child of his own, he realized how little he knew about what that actually meant. The next morning, he found himself dialing Anna's number before he could talk himself out of it. She answered on the second ring, her voice cautious. "Hello?" "It's me," James said. "I got the results." There was silence on the other end for a moment before she responded. "And?" "You were telling the truth," he admitted. "I wanted to call and talk about what happens next." She sighed, and he could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "I appreciate that, James. I really do. But I meant what I said before. I can do this on my own." James frowned, gripping the phone tighter. "That's not the point. I don't walk away from my responsibilities." "This isn't just about responsibility," she said. "It's about what's best for the baby." James rubbed his temple, feeling frustration creeping in. "And you think what's best is for me to be absent?" Anna hesitated. "I think what's best is for the baby to have stability. I don't know you, James. And you don't know me. Just because we share DNA doesn't mean we automatically become a family." Her words hit him harder than he expected. She was right. They were practically strangers. Yet, despite that, he felt an unshakable pull toward fixing this, toward finding a way to be part of this child's life. I don't know how to do this, he admitted, his voice quieter now. But I want to figure it out. There was another pause before Anna responded, softer this time. Then I guess we'll have to figure it out together. James exhaled, the tension in his chest easing just slightly. All right. Let's start there. For the first time since this had begun, he felt like he had taken a step forward. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. James had spent years negotiating billion-dollar deals, facing off against corporate giants, and making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Yet, as he sat in the back of his car, staring at the message on his phone, he felt completely out of his depth. Anna had agreed to meet him in person to talk. No lawyers, no formalities, just a conversation. It was the first time since the DNA results had come back that he had a chance to face this situation properly. He had spent the past few days trying to process everything, but no amount of logical thinking or business strategies could prepare him for this. The car pulled up to a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Manila. It wasn't the kind of place he was used to, no high-rise views, no expensive decor, just a simple, cozy space with wooden tables and soft lighting. It felt personal, intimate, the kind of place where real conversations happened. When he stepped inside, he spotted Anna immediately. She was sitting near the window, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She looked different from how she had on the yacht. There, she had been tense, bracing for a confrontation. Here, she looked tired but composed, as if she had made peace with whatever was about to happen. She glanced up as he approached, her expression unreadable. "You came," she said, her tone neutral. James pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "I said I would." For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't hostile, but it wasn't comfortable either. It was the silence of two people trying to figure out how to bridge the vast gap between them. Finally, Anna sighed, setting her cup down. "So what now?" James leaned back slightly, considering his words carefully. "I don't have all the answers. But I know I don't want to pretend this isn't happening." She studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I can respect that." He exhaled, relieved that they had at least found common ground. "Tell me about the baby," he said. "How far along are you?" "Almost 5 months," she said, resting a hand on her stomach unconsciously. "It's been an adjustment." James's gaze followed her hand, a strange sense of reality settling over him. This wasn't just an abstract idea anymore. There was a child growing inside her, his child, and in a few months, everything would change. "Are you doing okay?" he asked, surprising even himself with the question. Anna's eyes softened slightly. "I'm managing. Some days are harder than others, but I have support." James hesitated before asking, "Your family?" She nodded. "My sister mostly. She's been helping me through this." He hadn't considered that, the idea that she had people in her life who had been there for her while he had been completely absent. It made him feel something unfamiliar, something that felt dangerously close to guilt. "I want to be involved," he said finally. "I don't know what that looks like yet, but I don't want to be just a name on a birth certificate." Anna looked at him carefully, as if trying to determine whether she could believe him. "Being involved means more than just financial support, James." "I know," he said, meeting her gaze. "And I'm willing to figure it out." She let out a slow breath. "Okay. Then we start with small steps." James nodded. Small steps. It wasn't a perfect resolution. It wasn't a neatly wrapped solution to everything that lay ahead. But for the first time, it felt like they weren't on opposite sides of this situation. And for now, that was enough. James wasn't sure what small steps meant, but he knew he had to start somewhere. Over the following weeks, he found himself in uncharted territory, trying to balance the life he had built with the one that was now unfolding before him. His world had always been dictated by structure, efficiency, and control, but this situation had none of those things. It was messy, unpredictable, and filled with unknowns that no business strategy could solve. He and Anna kept in contact, their conversations still somewhat awkward but gradually becoming more natural. At first, their exchanges were brief, mostly centered around updates about her pregnancy. She told him about her doctor visits, the symptoms she was experiencing, and the preparations she was making for the baby. James listened, absorbing information he never thought he would need to know. He asked questions, some of them clumsy, but Anna didn't seem to mind. If anything, she seemed surprised that he was actually making an effort. One afternoon, while sitting in his New York office after a long meeting, his phone buzzed with a message from her. She had sent him an ultrasound photo. "Meet your son." James stared at the image for a long time. The grainy black and white photo didn't look like much to him at first, just shadows and shapes, but the longer he looked, the more it hit him. This wasn't an abstract concept anymore. It wasn't just a complicated situation he had to figure out. It was real. There was a child growing inside Anna, a child that was his. For the first time since this had started, he felt something shift inside him. He typed out a reply. "When's the next appointment?" Anna responded a few minutes later. *, next week. "You don't have to, *. I want to be there." He didn't hesitate before hitting send. A week later, James was back in Manila, walking into the clinic where Anna was waiting for him. She looked up as he entered, and for the first time, there wasn't tension in her expression, just surprise. "You actually came," she said, standing up. "I said I would," James replied. They didn't say much as they walked into the exam room together. The doctor greeted them with a warm smile, clearly recognizing Anna from previous visits. James felt slightly out of place, but he pushed the feeling aside. This wasn't about him. Anna lay back on the examination table, pulling her shirt up slightly as the doctor applied the cool gel to her stomach. James stood beside her, watching as the screen flickered to life. The sound of the baby's heartbeat filled the room, steady and strong, and for the first time, James felt something he couldn't quite name. "That's him," the doctor said, pointing at the screen. "Everything looks good. He's growing well." James nodded, unable to take his eyes off the image in front of him. He had spent his entire life chasing numbers, profits, and success, but none of it had ever made him feel the way this moment did. Anna turned her head slightly to look at him. "Pretty real now, huh?" James let out a small breath and nodded. "Yeah. It is." For the first time, he wasn't thinking about what this meant for his reputation, his career, or his carefully planned future. He was thinking about his son. And for the first time, he realized that he wanted to be a father, not just out of responsibility, but because something about it felt right. James found himself in unfamiliar territory as the weeks passed. He was used to running a company, making executive decisions, and controlling every aspect of his life. But this was different. There was no guidebook for preparing to become a father, no clear-cut strategy that would tell him how to navigate this situation. He was stepping into a role he had never planned for, and for the first time in his life, he had to accept that he couldn't control everything. He continued traveling back and forth between New York and Manila, balancing his work obligations with the growing need to be present for Anna and the baby. At first, his visits were short, just long enough to attend doctor's appointments and check in with her. But as time went on, he found himself staying longer, extending his trips by a few days at a time, as if something was quietly pulling him toward this new reality. One evening, after another long day of meetings, he sat on the balcony of his Manila hotel, scrolling through emails when a message from Anna popped up on his screen. "Are you free tomorrow? I need to pick up some baby things, and I could use an extra set of hands." James hesitated. He had another conference call scheduled for the morning, followed by a flight back to New York in the afternoon. But instead of responding with a polite excuse, he found himself typing something unexpected. "What time?" The next morning, he met Anna outside a small maternity boutique in the heart of the city. She was already browsing through baby clothes when he walked in, her fingers running lightly over the soft fabrics. She looked different today, more relaxed, almost at ease. "You made it," she said, glancing at him with a hint of amusement. "You asked for an extra set of hands," he replied. "Here I am." Anna handed him a small list, her expression playful. "All right then, let's see how well a billionaire CEO handles baby shopping." James smirked but took the list, scanning the items. Diapers, bottles, blankets, how hard can it be? An hour later, he realized just how wrong he had been. The sheer number of options overwhelmed him. There were different sizes, different brands, and dozens of variations of every single item on the list. He had spent his career making million-dollar decisions in seconds, yet here he was, standing in the middle of a baby store, utterly lost. Anna watched him struggle, clearly enjoying his discomfort. "Not as easy as you thought, huh?" James sighed, rubbing his temples. "Why are there so many different kinds of bottles? Aren't they all the same?" Anna laughed, shaking her head. "Not even close. Babies can be picky. Some bottles mimic breastfeeding, some help with colic, some are better for newborns. It's a science." James frowned at the selection in front of him. "I feel like I should have taken a class for this." Anna raised an eyebrow. "That's not a bad idea." He looked at her, realizing she was serious. "You think I need parenting classes?" "I think we both do," she admitted. "Neither of us planned for this, but if we're going to do it right, we should probably learn as much as we can." James considered her words. He had spent his life educating himself in business, perfecting his skills, and becoming the best in his field. Why should this be any different? "All right," he said. "Sign us up." Anna blinked, as if she hadn't expected him to agree so easily. "Really?" James nodded. "Really. If I'm going to be a father, I want to know what I'm doing." Anna studied him for a moment before giving a small smile. "Okay. I'll find a class." By the time they finished shopping, James felt strangely accomplished. He had walked into the store completely clueless, but by the time they left, he had learned more about baby essentials than he ever thought he would. As they packed the bags into Anna's car, she turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "You know, I didn't expect you to be this involved." James leaned against the car, crossing his arms. "Why not?" She shrugged. "Because men like you, they usually don't stick around." Something about the way she said it made his chest tighten. "I'm not like other men." Anna held his gaze for a moment before nodding. "No, you're not." For the first time since this all started, James felt like he was finally proving something, not just to Anna, but to himself. He had spent years building his empire, thinking that success meant wealth, power, and control. But now, standing next to a woman carrying his child, with bags full of baby supplies in the trunk, he realized that maybe success wasn't just about what he built in the boardroom. Maybe it was about what he was building right here. James had always believed that change happened gradually through careful planning and strategic decisions. But over the past few months, he had learned that some changes arrive without warning, appending everything in an instant. What had started as an unexpected revelation had now become his reality, and the closer they got to the baby's arrival, the more he realized that his life would never be the same. His trips to Manila had become more frequent. At first, they had been about necessity, doctor's appointments, preparing for the baby, making sure Anna was taken care of. But now, there was something else keeping him here. He had started to feel a connection not just to the child growing inside Anna but to the life they were slowly building, however uncertain it still was. One evening, as they sat in Anna's small apartment, sorting through baby clothes and organizing the nursery, James felt a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in years. The corporate world had always been his domain, a place where he thrived under pressure, where every move was calculated for maximum efficiency. But here, in this small space filled with tiny onesies and baby blankets, he found himself in unfamiliar territory. There were no spreadsheets, no quarterly reports, no high-stakes negotiations. just the quiet anticipation of something he had never truly prepared for. Anna sat on the floor, folding a stack of baby clothes with practiced ease. She looked up at him with a small smile. "I never imagined you doing this," she admitted. James smirked, picking up a tiny pair of shoes. "Neither did I." She laughed softly. "You're surprisingly good at it." He set the shoes down and leaned back against the couch. "I had a good teacher." Anna's smile faded slightly, and she looked at him carefully. "What about your parents?" she asked. "Were they like this when you were born?" James hesitated before answering. "Not exactly. My father was distant. Always working, always focused on the business. He provided for us, made sure we had everything we needed, but he was never really there. My mother tried, but she was caught between being the perfect corporate wife and raising me alone." Anna listened without interrupting. James exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I don't want to be that kind of father." Anna's gaze softened. "Then don't be." He looked at her, seeing the quiet reassurance in her eyes. It was simple advice, but it carried more weight than she probably realized. He had spent his entire life following a path that had been set for him, making choices that aligned with his ambitions. But this wasn't about business. This was about something more, something that required him to step outside the world he had built for himself and embrace the unknown. A sudden movement caught his attention, and Anna let out a small gasp, pressing a hand to her stomach. James immediately straightened. "Are you okay?" She nodded quickly, her eyes wide with surprise. "He just kicked." He stared at her stomach, caught between fascination and disbelief. "Can I?" Anna smiled and reached for his hand, guiding it to the side of her belly. For a moment, there was nothing, just the warmth of her skin beneath his palm. Then, suddenly, he felt it, a small but distinct movement. James froze. It was real. More real than anything he had ever experienced. A rush of emotions surged through him, ones he couldn't name, ones he had never allowed himself to feel before. He had built an empire, shaped industries, made decisions that had changed lives. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had ever compared to this moment. Anna watched him, her expression unreadable. "You okay?" James swallowed, nodding slowly. "Yeah. I didn't expect that." She laughed softly. "He's getting stronger. It won't be long now." James didn't move his hand, still feeling the faint movements beneath his fingertips. For the first time since this had all started, he wasn't thinking about the future in terms of logistics or responsibilities. He wasn't thinking about the challenges, the adjustments, or the uncertainty. He was just thinking about his son. And for the first time in his life, he knew exactly what he wanted. The ending of this story is powerful because it reflects growth, transformation, and the acceptance of responsibility in a way that feels deeply human. James starts as a man who is entirely in control of his life, wealthy, powerful, and emotionally detached. His world revolves around calculated decisions, where everything is transactional and structured. But life, as it often does, throws him into a situation he never anticipated, one that cannot be solved with money, strategy, or negotiation. What makes this conclusion satisfying is that James doesn't just take responsibility for his child out of obligation, he genuinely changes. He evolves from someone who sees fatherhood as a disruption to someone who embraces it as a privilege. His gradual emotional connection to Anna and their unborn son is what makes this transformation believable. Instead of forcing an unrealistic romantic ending or a dramatic resolution, the story allows his journey to unfold naturally. Anna's role is just as important. She is not portrayed as a woman chasing after James for wealth or status, nor is she helpless. She stands her ground, giving him the space to make his own choices while maintaining her independence. This dynamic makes their relationship feel authentic rather than forced. By the end, she sees James as more than just the man who fathered her child, she sees him as someone who is truly trying to be better. The most impactful moment in the ending is James feeling his son's first kick. It is a simple, intimate moment, but it represents everything he has come to understand. Success, power, and wealth have defined his life, but in that moment, none of it matters as much as the life he is about to bring into the world. The fact that he is no longer running from this reality but embracing it makes his arc deeply satisfying. This is a story about unexpected responsibility, but more than that, it is about choice. James had every opportunity to walk away, to throw money at the problem and continue his life unchanged. But he chooses to stay, to learn, to be present. And in doing so, he discovers a version of himself he never knew existed, one that isn't just a CEO or a billionaire, but a father. The best endings aren't just about tying up loose ends, they are about showing how far a character has come. And in this story, James doesn't just find his son, he finds himself.